Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Bashabi. A warm welcome to today's talk, actually, today's conversation. And it's an honor to have you as part of this conversation. I am a great admirer of your work, and then I have been reading you, following your work actually for last 8 or 9 years. So those who are not familiar with Bashabi Fraser's work, Bashabi Fraser, CBE, is a poet, children writer, editor, translator, and a very prominent academic. As a transnational writer, Bashabi Fraser's work traverses continents as she writes about Scotland and India. He is the professor emerita and a former professor of English and creative writing. She is the co-founder and the director of the Scottish Centre of Tagore Studies, the chief editor of the academic and creative e-journal, Gitanjali and Beyond. Bashabi Fraser is also a Royal Literary Fund Fellow at the University of Dundee and an honorary fellow at the Centre for South Asian Studies at the University of Edinburgh. So, Bashabi, a warm welcome, pranam. And I mean, I can continue talking about you perhaps the whole night. The contributions you made is so phenomenal. And especially what strikes me is the fact that your contribution is so versatile, such a wide spectrum of activities you are involved with. First of all, as an academic, you I mean, you have so extraordinary and unique works you have done so far, and then through activism as well. So this is quite a rare combination. We find many academic, but they are based on theory. But you also founded I mean, what's that called, the Scottish Church of Tagore Studies. So you're preaching Tagore through developing theories, through doing academic works, and also through activism. And then you are a wonderful poet, such a rare combination. We'll talk about it. But first of all, Bashabi, what's your take on this year's Nobel Prize? Abdulrazak Gurnah received Nobel Prize this year. I'm sure you read perhaps his Paradise, the one that was shortlisted for book I read about 3 or 4 years ago. Did you manage to meet him anywhere? Because you go to so many festivals as a speaker, as a poet. I was wondering whether you met him in any festival apart from reading. So you can perhaps share your reading experience, or if you managed to meet him any festival or anywhere.
I haven't met him personally, Abdulrazak Gurnah, but I'm delighted that he has got the Nobel Prize, very well deserved. I have heard him, and I think what the Nobel Prize signifies is the importance of the displaced person. The displaced person who is always living on the margins, whom all major political parties in power try to criminalize, and yet Gurnah has shown that his humanity through his novels, through his fiction, which actually follow the lives of people who are looking for a refuge, who arrive from somewhere, not because they have left because they want to, but because they have been displaced by circumstances beyond their control. So I think the humanity of his theme, that every person who moves, deserves a home, a refuge on this earth, is something that has found recognition through the Nobel Prize. And I think another significant reason behind which makes me really pleased for this particular award is that Wole Soyinka, I think, was the last writer
From
from
Africa, yes,
Africa
yes,
to
from
get the
Africa.
Nobel Prize.
Olushenka, yeah.
Yeah, and
Unfortunately, Achebe didn't get Nobel Prize, but Olushenka managed to.
that's
Uh,
right. So
yeah.
35 years later, while we all know that Black Lives Matter, it's good finally for this recognition that one other writer has entered this wonderful Hall of Fame.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you. I am also a big fan of Amos Tutola. I'm sure you read perhaps Amos Tutola, and perhaps that is something that Nobel Committee also said. I noticed on Abdulrazak Gurnah that he was through Paradise he actually perhaps tried to offer a new Congo apart from the uh, Western idea of, challenging Western idea perhaps on Africa. And Ole Soyinka, especially Amos Tutola, is quite significant. He was almost like a quite significant anti-colonial writer who challenges even the right English language. But let us come back to your own comfort zone, Bashabi. You are a poet. I'm asking you because I have got my answer, but I'm trying to explore your idea. And the time I was thinking to sit with you, I was thinking also to find out your own take on Tagore especially, because I was thinking you are a poet and you went through perhaps so many unexplained, undefined crisis of modernity that you did not see in Tagore. Especially after Eliot, uh, when a new way of writing developed, and especially when in world literature and world philosophy, when Sartre, Nietzsche challenges the supreme submission that Tagore is almost devoted to. And then there are many poets, my favorite poets, for example, Paulus Celan, Nicanor Parra, Borges, many others, George Seferis, for an example, who, whenever you read them, you see the reflection of your own modern minds. But when you read Tagore, do you have any conflict? Apart from the linear, what some academics say is mystic modernity, there are some other critical, modern side of a human being. Do you still find Tagore still relevant, considering those issues?
I think that's a very good question, a loaded question. For me, and for many of us who know Rabindranath and have read him, Rabindranath is always modern because he's always relevant. He's a poet who has been willing to evolve. He traverses 2 centuries, the 20th, 19th and the 20th. Like Yeats, he was influenced by the Romantics, who were today, who would be vilified for being left-wing. So Rabindranath was a radical. He started writing during Victorian times, and like everybody else, all writers who wrote in Victorian times, he wrote like Victorians. But then he evolved and entered the 20th century. And there was this whole furore from the Collal group, who were great fans of Baudelaire. And
and Eliot as well. Eliot
as well, and Pound and Yeats. But Rabindranath was way ahead of his time. He said that while Europe had all its institutions being destroyed by World War I, and broken images signified the European experience, India was still not free, and India was not experiencing the war in the same way, though we were sending our soldiers there. Ours was a different struggle. We were still not free. We were fighting for democracy in Europe when we were still a subject nation. We had to write differently. We had to find a different vehicle for our expression. And that is what Tagore did. He carried the burden of his time always in his poetry. And the biggest challenge that he, as we know, that he was talking to the colonial poets. He was writing about adhunikata, modernity, and he said himself that he was truly modern, and he interpolated a section called Rabi Thakurer Shobha, an assembly of Rabindranath in Shesher Kobita, the last poem. And that last poem by Labonno actually puts a lid on the whole debate of whether Rabindranath was modern or not, because that was a true modernist poem. And it was the answer. I would also say that in 1941, Rabindranath, before his death, wrote Crisis in Civilization. And that is not a romantic's response in the sense of an idealist speaking. It is somebody who still believes, has faith, as every romantic does, in humanity, in the potential of humanity to change for the better. So he never loses his faith in humanity, which is what a romantic does. But that doesn't mean he's wishy-washy. He is actually speaking against the destruction of humanity, of institutions, of everything that matters in this world during the Second World War. And he says that maybe the answer should come from the West. To answer your question, which you raised first as the mystic modern, I think that is a European construct. You know, when he got the Nobel Prize, he was seen as the Eastern sage, the Eastern prophet. He played along with it for a little while, but then, and it was all right, you know, an Easterner as a mystic, but then the Easterner was a pragmatist. He was an educationist, he was an environmentalist, he was a patriot, and he was a critic of imperialism and militarization and expansionism. That didn't sit very well with the powers at that time. And that is what went against him. And that is Rabindranath, an all-rounded human being who was idealistic but grounded.
Right, but I'm particularly on his poetry, Bashabi. I was thinking, whenever you read perhaps Rabindranath now, along with the other world poets, would you still see the reflection of complexity of modern life that we are facing now?
Yeah.
Say, for instance, Tagore beautified sky, and then we realized all of a sudden that there is no sky on our hat. Empirical science, and then all of a sudden, Eisenberg perhaps developed an idea, a groundbreaking idea that anything we see is not certain. I mean, whenever we read Tagore, perhaps 70% of his works is a submission to something that we don't see, and then we face a reality which talks about the tangible reality, tangibility of life. Do you find any conflict when you read Tagore now, thinking about all those? Perhaps you mentioned about Eurocentric way of exploring Tagore, or Indian reality is perhaps not something that we see in European reality. But I mean, at this moment, when you read Tagore, especially poetry, can you still relate relate your own crisis, your own your own self actually in Tagore when you read, especially poetry?
Absolutely. I mean, if you think of his, I've just written a chapter actually and sent it off for a book on invitation, and there I write about his modern verse narrative poems. Where if you think of the clerk, if you think of the ordinary girl, Shadharan May, if you think of something like Camellia, the Chantal girl, he's looking at very ordinary lives in the metropolis, the elitist middle class pompous male, and who sort of can go into the rural countryside and then suddenly discover that there is beauty and there is humanity, and even in the tribes there. So yes, Tagore remains relevant, but also I would say Tagore is when even as old as Gitanjali in 1912, he's saying, why are you leave your beads, stop praying, go out there and look at the man who's toiling. There is your example of divinity, of the toiler. So I think if you look at poems in Lipika, if you look at poems in Shejuti towards the end, he is evolving all the time. And I think Tagore remains relevant. When I came to Britain to live here,
Yeah,
for a long time, I couldn't listen to Tagore songs
yeah,
because they were so relevant that I
true.
wanted to cry. And they are
Yeah,
also poems. I hope
yeah.
that answers your question.
No, that's yeah. Great, thank you. I was wanting to explore your own take actually. I have my answer whenever I read Tagore till now. And another question I always uh, feel to ask someone. Perhaps let's start with you, Bashabi. Why? I mean, why do you think Tagore fails to recognize Jivanananda Das, such a great poet of Bengal after Tagore? He was talking. He was praising some less important poetry, for an example. I mean, he was talking in favor of Shudin Dutta and some other Joshimuddin, perhaps, but he fails to recognize. Is it because the new way of writing poetry was against way, or what's your view on this?
I don't think Rabindranath fails to recognize Jivanananda Das.
Very vaguely he said, "Oh, this is," and that is not even enough to recognize the such a major poet of Bengal.
Yeah, but
Jivanananda Das.
we must also remember that when Kaji Nazrul Islam is in prison, it's
Yeah,
Rabindranath who dedicates his
yeah,
collection to him. So I don't think that Rabindranath is failing to recognize Jivanananda Das. He was a very generous soul.
yeah,
I don't think he would minimize anybody,
yeah,
and definitely not writing a lot on Jivanananda Das is not a failure of recognition, but I think there is some recognition still there. He was too
yeah.
generous a spirit to, deny anybody. In fact, others were not generous to Rabindranath.
Yeah,
A lot of people, like Buddha Dev Bose and his whole circle, who
yeah,
later did recognize that he was a modern of moderns.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Another thing, I know that you have got you have such a talented research work on Tagore and Patrick Giddens. I also would like to have your take on the confluence or sort of. Um, I mean, you have perhaps a book, the confluence of two different minds, or something like this.
That's
Uh,
right. Yeah, there are two books. One is called A Meeting of Two Minds,
Yeah.
And this was 2005, the letters, which I introduced and edited. And this has 3 editions. This is the 3rd revised edition. The 4th revised edition is coming out this year. And this is Confluence of Minds, which I co-edited with Tapati Mukherjee and Amrit Chen. And
Right.
this is on Rabindranath Tagore and Patrick Geddes. It's a reader on education and the environment. So I think both of them, Geddes is a polymath, as is Rabindranath. Patrick Geddes went to India as the war broke out. He turned his back on Europe and he traveled to
So
India.
did they really meet in Bombay?
They probably, yes, they did meet in Bombay, but I think they probably first met in Calcutta, though there isn't total evidence of that, probably in the town hall. But they definitely had prolonged meetings in Darjeeling, of which we have full evidence. Yes, and they also met in Paris. So it was a global meeting of minds, yes.
So I was wondering, so do they have a real exchange of ideas? Because you wrote a book on correspondences between.
Yes, yeah, that's right. They did. They were both educationists, as I said earlier. They believed in interdisciplinarity rather than specialisms. When Rabindranath decided to establish Vishwabharati, his international university, he invited Patrick Geddes to submit the plans, which he did. And in fact, Geddes's son, Arthur Geddes, the geographer, went on Tagore's invitation and Patrick Geddes's encouragement. He went and stayed 2 years in Sriniketan and taught there and looked after Sriniketan when a lot of the time Leonard Elmhurst was traveling. And Arthur Geddes, my parents met Arthur Geddes in London in 1961 during the centenary. And Arthur Geddes spoke perfect Bangla.
Oh, so Patrick Geddes also made Rabindranath president of Bombay Indian College or something, is it?
That's right. Patrick Geddes, absolutely. Patrick Geddes founded the Scots College at Montpellier in the south of France and the Indian College next to it. And he made Rabindranath the president of the Indian College, and Jagadish Chandra Bose was the vice president of the Indian.
Wow, great. That is, you also perhaps found some sort of affinity of their ideas on nationalism. So in this case, perhaps if you kindly elaborate your own take on Rabindranath's nationalism.
Well, I think Rabindranath was very skeptical of nationalism because he knew that it could slide into fascism, and he was actually right, and that is what he wrote against. He was wary of narrow nationalism. So I would rather say he was a patriot, but not a nationalist. And in that sense. And Patrick Geddes, I think, because both of them were internationalists, they would look at nationalism in a very different way. They would be loyal, faithful to their country, but they believed in reaching out across the world to all humanity.
Wow. Oh, great. Thank you, Bashabi. Let us, I would like to come back to your own poetry. I'm a big fan of your writing, especially poetry. And before I move on to your poetry, let us perhaps finish Rabindranath's chapter. What would you think in this complex world, I mean, where nothing is perhaps linear, nothing is true, truth is, I mean, an illusion perhaps. Whatever we see as truth, that could be an illusion. So what ideas or works of Tagore you think need more to be preached in the world?
Mhm. I think his internationalism, where he reaches out to all strangers as friends, and I think everything he touched, he turned into gold. He wrote short stories, poetry, we know, essays, short fiction, as I said earlier, novels, plays. He wrote his own brand of songs, Rabindra Sangit, with 2,200 songs. He was a painter, 2,400 paintings. But he was also he created the dance drama, the first play, the opera, and that is something that is absolutely new. I don't think anybody else has done that. Uh, he actually introduced the short story to Bengali literature in its present form in conversational Bengali. And so I would say that every genre of his is exploratory. They look at social issues. They will always remain relevant, whether it's uh, women's uh, problems, domestic or public. He looks at the difference between the public and the private space. But he was a voice for the nation. He didn't stop from writing to the authorities when people were sent to prison or were tried. He, as we know, he renounced his knighthood after the Amritsar massacre. So to say that writers are apolitical is just something that cannot happen. Writers have to take a stand. I think what Rabindranath retains for us is the integrity of a man who was generous, who was for all times.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Let me read some few verses that hugely intrigued me. And that is perhaps wall in and wall out. And I mean, whenever I read this, I managed to decode so many uh, beautiful metaphors. And this is perhaps uh, uh, related to your, I mean, when I read some other works, like sort of you wrote on partition, I was thinking whether partition in a deeper sense, not just two Bengals, partition between two different countries, partition in humanity, uh, coming over and over again to your poetry. And one, this is, there was a time when you and I chased the same butterfly, climbed the same stolid trees with the fearless expertise that children take for granted before their faith is daunted. Do you remember how we balanced a wheel down dusty paths with childish zeal? I read some others as well, some other wonderful poetry. So this is something that I feel I should ask you. And if I just restructure my question in this way, that when I read this, I can see a beautiful collection of memories, the couplet of words that I'm alluding from, definitely were aware of Milan Kundera, and perhaps an unquenchable search, a search to explore the city Edinburgh through Kolkata, Tay through Ganga, innocence of childhood through wisdom of the age, and of this age actually, and then perhaps through confluence of binary opposite but interlinked words and ideas. And I have seen this collection of memory and nostalgia, uh, and we have actually seen in Michael Madhusudan Dotto. He was exploring Kobita while he was in France in different way, in different dimension. And then I'm sure you, Bashabi, I'm not sure that you're familiar with another wonderful writer's work, Lokanath Bhattacharya. Ori Mishu, one of my French writers and philosophers, Ori Mishu wrote on him, Lokanath Bhattacharya. And then obviously Syed Waliullah, and then R.K. Narayan in some extent. R.K. Narayan, who just nostalgia, collection of memory, exploring tradition, even sometimes more inclined to own tradition, firstly to make your voice more. That is something that I come to ask you. Is it because you wanted to make your voice more distinctive? That's why you explored Thai through Ganga, because Western audiences can perhaps see their river through the juxtaposition of another river, another Indian river, or you have a vision to preach your tradition more obsessively to global audiences?
I think from the Ganga to the Tay, the two great rivers have their voices. So rather than me speaking, it's they who are speaking. And rivers for me signify life, because without fresh water, we cannot live. And all civilizations have actually sprung on the banks of rivers from ancient times. And what I have found is there's a long shared history between the subcontinent and Britain. And who best could tell this story than the two rivers who flow through time? They're timeless, and just as and history has been recorded on their banks. Both the Tay and the Ganga have a direct link through the story of Jute. The story of Jute is the story of two cities.
Wow,
of
beautiful.
Kolkata and Dundee. And that is what drew me to the two rivers telling their story. But what is interesting is when I was writing this, the designer asked me to say Ganges because the West knew Ganga as Ganges. And I said, no, because this is Ganga speaking. Ganga would never call herself the Ganges, because the first line is, they call me Ganga. So she meant her people call her Ganga. So actually, I think I was trying to give a voice to the timelessness of humanity and human connections through history.
Yeah, that is quite visible in your poetry, actually. And then in one poem you said, "And what is good about wall, unless they belong to my home?" And that is so important in Brexit. Even I mean, whenever any partition comes, these verses become so brighter, so close to your heart. I think you have this is also because you have a very kind of international vision and merging. I mean, when I read, when I try to explore uh, uh, Edinburgh through your eyes, it always, I mean, Ganga dazzles, Kolkata dazzles in your uh, picture or your painting of Edinburgh. Uh, Another thing, perhaps, I would like to end up this conversation, Basha, with you, with your reading, if that's okay. But another query, because I couldn't manage to read this, but this is for my own quest. Whether you know that you wrote a book on Scottish Orientalism. So is it our Renaissance? Was our Renaissance influenced by Scottish Orientalism, or they were the Scottish writers were influenced by the pioneers of our Renaissance in Bengal?
It's a very good question. I think Scottish Orientalism, the Scottish Orientalists who came to India, like David Hare and Alexander Duff and others, were kind of trained by what we call the democratic intellect, which was a book written by George Davey. And it's the democratic intellect that is very important, because long ago, Scotland decided that in its education system, right at primary level, it would separate history from mythology. So while the Mahabharata and Ramayana are wonderful epics, they're not history. The Iliad and the Aeneid are not histories. They're wonderful epics, but they are part of the cultural fabric of a nation.
It became almost like myth.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened was, right at primary level, they had history and mythology separate, to separate fact from fiction, reason from imagination. There's nothing wrong with imagination. We all are writers. We love the imagination, and that's what makes us human beings separate from animals, not just reason, but our imagination. But that kind of separation of reason and the imagination, of fact and fiction, was what made Scotland. And that is why this is a nation of discoverers and inventors. Today's modern life, we owe so much to the Scots, whether it's macadam roads or the steam engine, or Jenner, medical science. So it just goes on and on. And that is what, the rationalism of Scotland was fed into the Indian system. And because Bengal was the epicenter of British governance, that's where it all began. And any Renaissance actually always is influenced by writing from elsewhere, which enters it, because it then breaks all walls of that cocoon us and opens out onto the world. And that is what happened, the Bengal Renaissance, which then influenced the rest of India. So that is where the Scottish Orientalism and the Bengal Renaissance, that's the book. And there are several writers in it. So it's not just my book. It's a book by scholars from Scotland and India who've written on the various components of this period in history, which catapulted India. And when I say India, I don't just mean India, sans Pakistan and Bangladesh. I mean the subcontinent. For me, it's a subcontinent. Exactly. It catapulted us into the modern era. So that's where that continuum of ideas comes from. I just want to say one thing, and that is, thank you very much for the earlier biography that you read. It was, very generous of you. But I am a Royal Literary Fund Fellow, but I'm no longer with Dundee University.
All right.
I just want to say that I have been. I remain working with the Royal Literary Fund as a fellow, but I'm not with Dundee University anymore. So I just want to set that record right.
But would it be possible, Bashabi, to tell us briefly about the Tagore studies, the Center for Tagore Studies that you founded in Edinburgh? What exactly you do as part of the center?
Well, it's a research and it's a research center for both academic and cultural engagement with the world, between Scotland and the world. We base it on Tagore and his circle. So it's not just Rabindranath, because Rabindranath's circle was huge. It was national, international, and it is their ideas which remain relevant, which propel us into forward thinking and a sustainable environment interdisciplinary education, literature, culture, and the sciences. So it's and the social sciences. So basically, it's a research center that takes forward the ideas of Tagore and his circle, and those who still sustain and agree with the same ideas today. So, for example, someone like Amartya Sen, someone like Ramchandra Guha, you know, someone like Ijaz Ahmed. Uh, the list is long, and people like Blanka Notkova in Prague, um, people like Marianne Gibson in America, Geraldine Forbes in America. These are all people who have embraced the same kind of ideas. Basically, they are deeply humanist. And it's that deep humanism that drives the ethos of the center.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Bashabi, I started watching, well, this is, before I finish, I need to ask you about this as well, because I started watching Ritik Ghatak once again, because I'm writing something on Ghatak now, Ritik now. And then I think this is relevant as well to ask you about partition. What is your, you just mentioned that you, whenever you utter the word India, it always comes the Indian subcontinent. And you wrote a book on, I mean, you edited perhaps a book on partition as well. So what's your personal take on the partition, especially to Bengal?
For me, for me, people are identified not just by their religion. People are identified by their regional affinities, by language, by contiguity, by a culture that involves stories and songs and art and, of course, literature. And we come back to language. So these are shared relationships which we can't just suddenly wish away. And I think that is what defines Bengal. For me, my grandmother died calling her desh Chattogram, Chittagong. For her, that was her desh. My maternal grandfather, Dadu, he never spoke what we call standard Kolkata Bangla. He spoke Dhakaya Bangla because he was from Dhaka. So this for me is what matters. That experience that is part of their lives. And I was brought up by very liberal parents who didn't believe in divisions of any kind. And I think I'm very grateful to them, both my father and my mother, Anima and Bimalendu Bhattacharya, who my father didn't believe in caste divisions and didn't believe in hierarchies. My mother, all her life, tried to help people who were displaced by borders and tried to put them back on their feet through various training programs that she took on herself. So I think for me, partition brings displacement. And I think the biggest damage it does is not the shadow line on a map, but the division, the borders of the mind that it creates. And this is something we all have to fight against. The borders of the mind, the boundaries that separate us.
Your dad was born in Chittagong?
Yes, my father was born in Chittagong. My mother was born in Dhaka.
So how is your dad now? You visited India recently. And
yeah, he's 90 years old. He's still writing. He's just finished a book on agriculture and another on migration.
Wow.
Which will go to press very soon. He's a geographer. He's still writing. My mother died in 2005, but my father and is still writing. My mother also wrote quite a bit, but my father just goes on. I think one of his books is called The Geography of Deprivation, on hunger and poverty and gender discrimination, one of his recent books. So I think that's where I come from, and that's what Partition can do to people.
Yeah. So because this became a reality now, and although there was huge frustration, I mean, from post-partition generation, uh, we still have no clue why this partition became a reality. And then perhaps the another wonderful verse is that অন্নদা শঙ্কর রায় wrote, তেলের শিশি ভাঙলো বলে খোকার উপর রাগ করো, তোমরা যেসব বড় খোকা ভারত ভেঙে ভাগ করো। হ্যাঁ, তো this became this I mean this became almost like unchangeable reality. But how can we, what's your idea actually, how can we challenge this political decision? Not challenge, how can we ignore this political or evade this political situation and still can exchange, still can be merged as one? Have you got any proposal or any suggestion? Would you dream, have you got any dream on this perhaps in relation to, I mean, geographically we are divided perhaps, but still can we can still perhaps stay together. Europe was before Brexit, Europe was a model. Would you think still this can exist even in Bengal? This can be applied in Bengal?
I think one thing that has happened in Bengal, which is in our favor, is that unlike the border with West Pakistan, which, after a bloody swap of populations and property became a sealed border for a long time, the Bengal border remained a porous border. And I think that is a good thing. It's culture, a shared literature, all the songs we have. You can draw lines, but what about songs and poetry and
that is something you wrote in your one of your poem perhaps, that you can't draw lines on this is that called wall in and wall out? So you can't draw line on song. Yeah, that I can relate this what you said in your poem as well. Yes.
Yeah, and you can't divide rivers.
Yeah.
You can't stop the waters. They will flow through both countries. Isn't that marvelous? So exactly. I think we need to recognize that we have a shared history, a shared language, a shared literature, and we should continue the cultural exchange and make visas unproblematic.
True. True. And then perhaps the books and that comes under cultural exchanges. So books should be available in two Bengals.
Absolutely.
From different authors. I'm sure the politicians perhaps will not see as easily we are saying. They always find some problem in it.
Yeah, but we have the right to vote. We are the ones who vote them in, and we will get what we vote for. So true. A lot depends on that. I also wanted to say one more thing. You mentioned publishers. I think it's really good for especially Bangla books to be published both in Bangladesh and in West Bengal, and vice versa. Which one published here should have a publisher there as well, and we should have joint Boi Melas, book festivals and cultural festivals.
That is a good suggestion. Yes, yes. Joint Boi Mela. Yes.
Yeah. And shall I say one thing? What my husband says? He's a Scot. Neil Fraser is a Scot.
Neil says Fraser. Yes. Yeah.
Fraser. The best, and he's a social scientist. So and he did PPE at Oxford, politics, philosophy, and economics. So he speaks from a very kind of broad humanist base. And his theory is that international marriages create the best understanding.
Wow, great, fantastic. So, Bashabi, I actually direct the organization that I mentioned to you before, Show the Society of Poetry and Indian Music, one of the leading Indian classical music promoters here. Not just Indian classical, we promote global music, global art form. Uh, a After COVID, we developed. We are doing the centenary celebration of T.S. Eliot's phenomenal masterpiece, The Westland, and Kazi Nazrul's Bidrohi, another phenomenal masterpiece of 20th century. And I actually directed a theatrical presentation based on those two poems, but many other things are involved with this. So that will
Excellent.
tour to different cities. Would like to end up in Royal Albert Hall, and then would like to go to Edinburgh as well. Edinburgh Festival, perhaps next year. Would you think next year the festival will be in person? Edinburgh Festival. I think next year.
We sincerely hope so, with the vaccine.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. So I personally would like to invite you in some of our events, Bashravidi, and then if we can do something in as part of your center as well, that is something we need to collaborate perhaps in, especially not from academic side, but from
Cultural side.
Cultural side. Yeah. So let us plan to do something together.
We will welcome that.
And if you kindly read your own poem, if you have got anything from Homecoming, that is my favorite. But please choose.
I can read from
Please have
Homecoming.
your freedom. Yeah.
Yeah. Which one would you like me to read? Shall I read a bit from part 1, Kolkata, and a bit from part 2?
Exactly. Please do. Please do.
Okay, I'll read the beginning. Kolkata, the homing bird. Part 1. Kolkata, do you miss me? As your 11 million surged to 16, did your avenues and alleys and crossings turn every corner, scour the pavements, and follow the mountain skyline, looking for me? As your electric trains brought thousands every day and spilt them like lentils scuttling across market spaces, entering your factories, shops, and kitchens, did you ever stop for breath, to steal a moment of calm, to think of me? Do you remember my little face, caressed by the trellis of your balconies, entranced by the spouting fountain of your 6 o'clock hydrants? Do you remember your Moidan mists, the taste of your burnt clay char cloying my morning outings, as the charwala was swallowed by the mysterious fronds of haze that sinuously wound round Victoria Memorial and St. Paul's Cathedral? Kolkata, you were my city, where colorful kites on armored strings vied with birds of prey, and terraces met like beehives of open activity, a gigantic tenement with the roof removed to communicate as one community. Kolkata, you were mine to play in. And now I will read from part 2, Edinburgh. And just as the refrain is, do you remember me? Do you miss me? In Kolkata. In Edinburgh, the refrain is, do you accept me?
Good.
But will you let me blend in, Edinburgh, with the flowing pen power you hold in your folds? Can the stanzas of your many steps divide to let my lines interstice your spaces, Edinburgh? Are your stone tenements the embodiment of strength, their cold surface belying their warm interior of ensconcing intent? When I walk through the grass market, gaze up from Johnston Terrace, as the 1 o'clock gun startles me and the terrier across on Granny's steps, will you mistake me for a visitor, taking in the sights? Will you let your eyes slide over me? Or will you, Edinburgh, linger with me as I trudge up Calton Hill for a picture postcard view of Princess Street? And will you stand by my side, agreeing that there is no need to hurry away, for this is where I have come to stay? And from your vantage point, I can rain my thoughts in celebratory confetti over this city, to merge with its cloud canopy and dissolve with its rare sunlight, suffusing my lines with the skyline of Edinburgh.
Thank you. Thank you, Bashabi. So you visited Kolkata recently, didn't you?
Yes.
How is the post-pandemic Kolkata now?
People are worried, but people have to carry on because most people, 70% of our subcontinental population, they are daily wage earners, so they have to go out and work. So they are working, but people are getting their vaccines. I met people outside when it wasn't raining, and it was lovely to be back again. I love the food there, and of course, it was a great opportunity to speak Bangla again and to be with my family. So I think the post-pandemic situation has hit everyone. We lost a very close friend, Shopun Chakraborty, Jadavpur University. We had a condolence meeting on Zoom. So we have lost a lot of good friends, close family members to this pandemic. And I think we just need to be aware of climate change and do everything to influence policy at the government level.
So you have a very genuine search, Bashabi. Everything you experience with, especially at this age. So you try to connect with your childhood's memory. So whenever you perhaps experience anything in Edinburgh, and how beautifully you connect things with the memory of Calcutta, with the memory of Ganga, with the memory of, and then the poem that you read now, the two different questions, but so significantly. I mean, do you miss me, Kolkata? That is a nostalgia. And I think so honest and genuine nostalgia. And then obviously to Edinburgh, do you accept me? And then you try to again, you try through Edinburgh, you try to reconnect your experience in Calcutta, your childhood. Let us end up this session by asking what you are planning to do now, Bashabi, in relation to your research work or your creative work. What are you working on now? What are you working on?
I have a new book out. This is the author's copy, so I got author's copy here. It's called Patient Dignity. These are poems by me, and the paintings are by Vibha Pankaj, very beautiful paintings. So she's also based in Edinburgh, and she's marvelous. As I wrote my poems, I sent them to her, and she responded to them. So this is how we kept our sanity.
What a great fusion! What a great fusion of painting and poetry! Wonderful.
Yeah. I think Vibha's paintings really speak a lot. So these are all the pandemic poems. I have another collection which is ready, and so I now have to bring it out. It's called Habitat, and I think that says everything. I am worried about a sustainable environment and a world. I have a little grandson, and I want to leave. I want us to leave a future for him and his generation. And
Any
so,
any research work?
yes,
I mean,
I'm also I've been writing quite a lot of chapters. As I told you, I've just finished a chapter on Rabindranath's narrative poetry, his modernist, not modernist, his modern poetry. I think modernity rather than modernism describes Rabindranath better. I have another chapter to write on Rabindranath as a political figure. So once I finish that, I think my next book, I would like to bring all the work that I have on Tagore into one collection so that all my thoughts are there. So that's one work, a piece of work that I will be working on. And I would like to write on a very great man, and that is on, well, on Bidhan Roy.
Bidhan
And
Rai, exactly. Wow.
I would like to write on Bidhan Roy, but I would also like to write on another educator, Bashabi. So these are the two I want to do before I die. But they will be I just as my biography of Rabindranath, it's a critical biography, but I think it's a very accessible book. It reads like fiction.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's very accessible. I want to write both these books in the same fashion. That those are two. But there's one more, and that is I have collected a lot of stories of Scots in India, interviews that I took, and I want to bring them together in one book. So quite a lot still to do. So I need to live to do it, and I will be I will be bringing out hopefully a book of poems to my little grandson Louis, because I keep writing poems to my little Louis.
Yeah, you write for children as well. Wow, great. What a great spectrum.
So that's it, I guess.
Thank
I am
you.
writing a novel. I should say that.
Oh
I
yeah, that is something I initially wanted to ask you. That you wrote poetry, but I haven't seen any fiction you wrote so far. So did you write ever any fiction, any short story or novel
I have
before?
published a couple of short stories in a couple of anthologies that I was invited to write in. And one actually came out from Bangladesh, from Dhaka, one
Mhm.
story. And another has come out from Delhi recently. So those are kind of my two debut short stories that have been published. But my novel, I need to return to. It begins in undivided India, and
Right.
it is based in both Bengals. For me,
Great.
there is one Bengal united by language, literature, and culture.
True. আমরা মানে let me say in Bengali, I say always opar Bangla, not epar opar, parhin Bangla. The the Bangla that doesn't have any par, any bank or any limit. So opar Bangla.
I, I should add to this, my cousin Rajat Shubra Chakraborty has made a film called Parapar, which should be coming out very soon. And I have written a poem in English, Parapar, and it is about
Wow,
Dui Bangla. So Parapar.
great, great. Thank you, Bashabi. Many thanks for your time and look forward to meeting you. Are you available on 14th of November? Perhaps I could invite you to come and join us at Richmond Theatre for the production that you are doing that is touring to London. And if you kindly do a bit of introduction on Nazrul's Vidrohi and T.S. Eliot's Westland, just a brief introduction perhaps. Are
Uh,
you available on 14th of November?
I am in Britain. If you can have me on Zoom, if there
Yeah,
is such a possibility, the answer is yes. But right
exactly.
now, I won't be able to travel.
No, that's understandable. I can perhaps talk to you after this. But many thanks for your time and many thanks for your precious input
Mm.
on some of those some of my questions that I really genuinely wanted to know about your input. So look forward to meeting you soon, Bashabi. Stay safe and see you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Your questions have been probing, thoughtful, and marvelous. And it has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.